This is an introduction to the first of a weekly series of special focus videos that will support the work of our Living Resilience Deep Academy kind of support group, ongoing support group and study group for the collapse-aware community that we call our little community of practice. And this is the winter time of 2021. And we're just starting up another 10-week series. We tend to work on in cycles of 10 weeks, and we bring along a theme or two that, in case we have extra time on our hands in our weekly sessions, we can be sparked into conversation and into practices by bringing up particular themes that we've watched videos or read articles or read poetry or listened to music and so on, all of which is intended to activate us together in some way about a particular topic that is somehow related to the collapse-aware conversation and community. And so this time around, it's a combination of soul and grief. And I'm very pleased to be introducing the first few elements that are on offer to the community of practice folks. One is that I'll be providing a PDF, a small pamphlet book of essays from Francis Weller. And Francis Weller's videos and interviews and books and so on will be a big part of what resources we call on for this combination of grief and soul, because that seems pretty much the way that when one would describe the work that Francis Weller does is at the intersection of grief and soul. So what will follow this brief introduction that you're watching right now is about 20 minutes of a full-length interview, which is, I think, 90 minutes in length. And in fact, you can watch the full-length video of that in the course materials if you wish. It'll be right below this video. But this will, again, just have the first 20 minutes or so. And you can get a sense of Francis Weller. You can get a sense of Michael Lerner, who is a compadre of Francis in the production of a number of healing courses that they both participate in addition to the extensive amount of grief rituals and so on that Francis runs basically year-round all the time. So I'd just like to mention a few of the terms and really how to navigate as we go into these weeks together, and you can start to consider, like, why grief and soul together, and what is soul? You know, is that some religious thing that goes on into the afterlife and so on? I think you're gonna, if those are your questions, I think you're going to find some refreshing and unusual and perhaps inspiring new definitions for soul that are on offer. And you'll also, I think, be as intrigued as I am about some of the concepts that that Francis has really brought to the forefront in his exploration of soul and grief. And one of them that is, he'll finish up, he'll just get to the edge of making this distinction of rough initiation. Basically, he and Michael talk about, you know, we're in some troubled times now around the world, and they don't pull any punches about all that. But they help to put it into a different framing than just the despair and the fear and so on that can be rampant if someone has no other way to look at the world, the global situation. So this idea of a rough initiation I find it extraordinarily empowering because it nudges me into the dimension of the mythopoetic, something far larger than the daily framing of my life that I would be, that'd be the only thing I would have if I just stayed with the business as usual global culture and the upbringing that we all get in that culture. I think these two men are offering us an extraordinarily rich and powerful way to relook at what it is we're living into as a culture, and then for each of us individually. So that's the rough initiation. That again, they'll just be kind of barely beginning to talk about rough initiation at the end of this, the first week's clip. Next week and beyond, we'll be hearing far more about that. I hope you'll also understand more about Francis's emphasis, focus for really his whole career as a therapist, an author, a workshop leader, and what he calls himself a soul activist. That his focus with people has been on the stuff of soul from his perspective, and that takes him in the direction of course, grief and also shame, addiction, depression, really the mud at the center of our darker and lower experiences in life, meaning that you'll hear him distinguish between soul and that downward direction, that descent into soul, as opposed to that ascension that we often hear about with the spirit realm and so on. And it isn't like one's right or one's wrong. He's just mentioning and laying out for us the distinction of where he's put his attention, and is inviting us to at least visit with him in that realm for these weeks. So I hope you enjoy this video and the ones to follow as we look at the entirety of their full-length interview with one another, and then again the reading of perhaps an essay per week would be great from his small book of essays that I've included in the course material for you to download. And then also, I hope you will soon dive into one of the videos below this one, which is Bill Plotkin and his definition of soul. I find it quite extraordinary and refreshingly crisp and clear, and lays it out, as opposed to Francis, who tends to stay on the vague side, and for good reason. You'll hear about that. But I hope you will explore Bill Plotkin's definition as well. Bill Plotkin, as we will discover together, is himself a workshop leader, a rite of passage leader, wilderness soul retrieval expedition leader for individuals with his Animas Valley Institute. This should be a rich time, a time to slow down together, a time to dig into the depths with one another, and perhaps find a whole different side of ourselves with which we can start to experience and engage in a different way than, again, what the default teachings we may have gotten as children in the business as usual world. I think this is really an offering that starts to nudge us toward true adulthood, the true sobriety that comes from deep diving into the realm of the soul, and perhaps through the gate of grief. So thank you for joining me and us in this journey of these next few weeks. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, and hopefully your interest is piqued by seeing a few of these videos, a few of these excerpts from the community of practice trajectory in these weeks. All the information you might want to dig into about this community of practice, about this work, is available in the show notes. So look forward to seeing you at the next community of practice session. Bye.
Welcome.
Francis Weller, welcome back to the new school.
Very glad to be here. Good to be back on familiar ground.
Francis, how many years have we been co-leading the Cancer Help Program together?
I first began in 2013, so I guess 8 years now. Yeah.
And about how many retreats have we done together?
15?
15.
15.
So for 15 weeks over the last 8 years, Francis and I have sat together in the living room with 8 participants in the Cancer Help Program. We just did our 212th Cancer Help Program, the first one outdoors. Imagine just moving the whole Cancer Help Program, week-long program, outdoors. And we've sat together and co-led the programs, including the very memorable Wednesday night program on death and dying.
Yes.
Francis, it's a real honor in my life to be friends and to work with you. You and I both know that for the ancients, friendship was the highest form of human relationship. And that is because friends, in the true sense, ask nothing of each other than to accompany each other in this journey. And so it is disencumbered of all the contractual ways in which we seek to live together. And to have both a friendship and then this partnership in the Cancer Help Program. You asked me to write the introduction to your extraordinary book, which I commend to everybody, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Rituals of Renewal, and the Sacred Work of Grief. You wrote a second book, The Threshold Between Loss and Revelation, and a third book, In the Absence of the Ordinary, Essays in a Time of Uncertainty.
Yes.
And you're at work on a fourth book, which I truly look forward to, The Alchemy of Initiation, Soul Work and the Art of Ripening. You've introduced the healing work of ritual to many thousands of people. And I have many friends who've been to your healing rituals and have participated myself and know that you really are a master of that kind of healing ritual among the great masters of our time. You founded and direct Wisdom Bridge, which offers opportunities to integrate the wisdom of indigenous cultures with insights from Western poetic, psychological, and spiritual traditions. And you've developed a style of what you call soul-centered psychotherapy. You have a series of audio series on it, which I think are remarkable. Your writings have appeared in many journals and anthologies, in The Sun, The Utne Reader, Cosmos Journal, and of course you give talks all over the place. You say that in your private practice as a psychotherapist since 1983, so almost 40 years, 38 years, you specialize in grief work, shame, addiction, depression, and men's issues. And you say of your style of working with people, soul-centered psychotherapy, this approach to working with the wounds and challenges we face restores soul as the primary focus. What this means is that I place less emphasis on the resolution of issues and more on the development of a richly textured soul life. When we listen to soul, to what is latent in the symptoms of depression, anxiety, or addiction, we hear a more subtle voice calling out for attention. Only then do we come to understand the wisdom hidden in suffering. I'm going to read that again, because this is the heart of a lot of wisdom work. Only then do we come to understand the wisdom hidden in the suffering. Only then do we see what our soul has been asking of us all along. Once granted, the symptoms often abate, leaving us deepened by the encounter with soul.
That's pretty good.
Not bad. So, our topic today is living into the long dark. And you've written an extraordinary essay for Dwayne Elgin's new book as an introduction, Choosing Earth, a 10-page essay which I would commend to everybody as I would commend the book. But let's just start for a moment with what you were seeking to say in that essay with which you introduced Dwayne Elgin's book. What does it mean to you to live into this long dark?
Partly what I'm trying to say in the essay or the preface is that we've left ordinary time. We've left the chronic addiction to increase, to rising, to success, to being dominant. The heroic quest has basically come to an end. And that this long dark is really a period of descent. That we are dropping below the surface of the common cultural fixations of success and achievement and purchases, and this is a time of shedding. This is a time of letting go. This is a time of endings, and we're not comfortable with those. We like the old formulas. We like the old strategies, but they're all collapsing, and we're seeing that in racial issues and gender issues and economic issues. Certainly we're seeing it in climate. So what I was trying to say in this essay was that we need to develop the capacities to endure a prolonged period of uncertainty, of being outside of the familiar, and being willing to cultivate a new way of seeing in the dark. And the other part I really wanted to try to get across was that this is an invitational space. We don't know what's going to happen. And there's a possibility that this time of descent is actually a time of initiation for the species. It's a rough initiation. It's not one that we wanted to undergo, but it's one that we have now been thrown into. And we have an opportunity, I don't know how strong an opportunity, to use this time to fortify our relationships to soul, to one another, and ultimately to this planet. And if we can do that, we just might, in the long run, in the long dark, seed something possible for the generations that are yet to come. We won't see that time. That's why I'm calling it the long dark. Most of us here will not see the end of this process. But it's up to us to seed it, to begin it, to do whatever we can to ripen our own lives, our relationships, in ways that can fortify something that's sustainable long term. So those that are maybe not even born yet might find their place in this world, but there might still be a world here for them to engage.
So for those, let's just start with some very simple nomenclature questions. When you speak of a soul-centered psychotherapy, or when you speak of this long dark as a time when soul emerges, many people really aren't familiar with what you or we mean by soul. It's given many definitions, but what do you mean by soul?
Well, I'm not speaking about it in the metaphysical, religious sense. I'm talking about it in a psychological sense. Psyche, the word psyche is the Greek word for soul. So to engage soul means to engage psyche, to engage our own deep, our own depths. So when I talk about the long dark, we could say that the fixation of the rising and now the introduction of descent. Descent takes us into the territory that is soulful. Soul has to do with what is low, what is close to the ground, what is vulnerable, what is weak, what is close to our tenderness, our grief. It isn't about strength or control or rising. It is really about dropping down to the ground. And that's where we are being taken, down into a place where humility is much more noble than mastery, where entanglement is more precious than entitlement, where responsibility is more precious than rights. This is the territory that soul takes us into. Soul lives in the entanglement between us and this incredible, sensual, erotic place we call earth, and between friendships. Mm-hmm. That's where soul manifests itself most explicitly. We could spend days. In fact, I spent 10 weeks trying to outline what soul means. I don't think we ever got there, but soul is this multifaceted, multidimensional experience that has to do with beauty, imagination, ritual, grief, elderhood, community. Those are the territories that soul gets enmeshed in. And it's a complementarity to spirit. Spirit rises, likes to speak about the unification, unity, the one, where soul likes to get into the mess of it all. In the fray and the multiplicity, the complex territory of engagement.
So both of us have learned a great deal from the great archetypal psychologist James Hillman. So in that map where spirit ascends and soul stays close to the body and to suffering and so on, is there in Hillman's sense or in your own sense a place where you would place ego?
Well, I would use the term self.
Self.
That both spirit and soul are dependent upon something to translate that.
Right.
I mean, soul is utterly dependent upon me to express it. It can be a very insistent presence. You know, I mean, when you read off that bio of mine, God, why'd I have to talk about grief and shame and, defeat? I don't want to write about that stuff. Why couldn't I be the joy guy? Why can't I, the happiness guy? But my soul claimed me to talk about those things. And so I've had to be faithful to that. And that soul is utterly dependent upon me to do that. Without a self. Was what Yeats's poem, The Dialogue of Self and Soul? Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. There's a dialogue between me and soul on every given day. Its moods, its dreams, its images, its fantasies, its suffering. I pay attention to that every single day of my life. That's kind of how I orient my life. Mm-hmm. And that's partly what provides a sense of meaning and purpose to my life.
You had a beautiful quote early in your essay in the introduction to Dwayne Elgin's book from Hillman. Could you say it for us?
Yeah, Hillman wrote, "The world and the gods are dead or alive according to the condition of our souls." The world and the gods are dead or alive according to the condition of our souls. So when you see a world that is dying, what is it saying about the condition of our souls? We have neglected soul. Even psychology has neglected soul. I would call it a selfology now. It's so focused on self-improvement, self-development. That's fine, but where is the soul? So our souls end up feeling empty, neglected, bereft. And when we lose touch with soul, we feel emptied. And why are we the largest consuming culture on the planet? Because in a sense, we feel emptied. And that emptiness, we try to fill it with every possible gadget and toy and car and TV show and addictions, but we never feel full. Because what we crave are the primary satisfactions, the things that shaped us over thousands and thousands of years, which is what gave shape to psyche, friendship, being together in times of grief and weeping together, giving thanks together, sharing meals together, being under the stars together, listening to the great stories being told. When those things are being satisfied, we don't want a new cell phone. We're not craving the next gadget. We are primarily satisfied. When people are here for the Cancer Help Program, we get up in the morning and we share food together. We share dreams in our circles. We share our sufferings and our yearnings and our disappointments and our failures. We share the whole gamut of what it means to be alive and being in this body. No one's wondering what's on TV tonight. We're living inside of primary satisfaction.
My work and yours, Francis, as you know, have many deep links, both, of course, in the Cancer Help Program and in the work of Commonweal for 45 years in deep intentional healing through the Cancer Help Program and healing circles and many other ways. But you also know that a preoccupation of mine for almost as long has been with planetary healing. And
Yes.
So as you described it, and I think your language is really beautiful, the long dark. We've been working on what we now call the global polycrisis for many years. I think 30 years ago, or maybe even 40, I wrote an essay called The Age of Extinctions and the Emerging Environmental Health Movement, which basically said, guess what, folks, we're living in another of the great ages of extinctions, and how are we going to turn this around? And I said, we're going to need an environmental health movement, and my bet is it's going to be led primarily by women. And that was before the language of the environmental health movement was around. And so what was then called the toxics movement, because my wife, Cheryl Patton, works a lot on toxics, we all have here for many years, starting a lot of campaigns on toxics, became the environmental health and justice movement. And that has had really a substantial impact. But while we win many individual victories, we're clearly losing the war, for a better world. And so it became clearer and clearer to me, particularly over the last 5 years, that what we're facing, the way the world looks at it, is we've got climate change, we've got COVID, and we've got inequality. Those are the three headline issues. And so the effort in Glasgow right now with the COP conference on climate change, the effort is to address climate and inequality, But that is such a vast oversimplification of what's going on, because in truth, there are, the way we count, perhaps 24 global stressors: environmental stressors, social stressors, technological stressors, and financial economic stressors. And these global stressors are interacting with increasing velocity and totally unpredictable outcomes. And it is what is called in the sociological literature, actually a man named Wes Churchman, whose son, Josh Churchman, lives in Bolinas, he's a great fisherman, and I think Wes used to live here too, but he introduced the term, the sociological term, that something is, quote, a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem that there is no known solution. There isn't a clear way out because you don't know. You may try this or you may try that. You don't know whether it's going to make it better or worse in the long run. And so when we started this work, people, even 5 years ago, people said, what are you talking about, the global polycrisis? You know, focus on something doable. But then the climate thing became an emergency, and along came COVID, which, quote, nobody expected. And so the climate emergency and COVID became poster children for the polycrisis, and people began to get it. So you're calling it the long dark. It has so many names, you know. It's called the global problematique. It's called the human dilemma. Some people talk very beautifully, poetically about navigating the great unraveling. It's called the great simplification. It's called the U-turn economy. So there are all these different narratives about what the polycrisis is, and there won't be a single narrative because the polycrisis, in effect, is everything. And the one thing that we know is that a complete metamorphosis of what it means to be human on Earth is taking place, and we can't stop it, right?
No escape.
So I love the long dark, but if you were talking to some of the techno-optimists, for example, you know, the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musk and so on and so forth, they see a future of colonizing space, you know? And so there are all these different visions. If you talk to people whose lives are getting better, or, you know, parts of the world where people are optimistic or feel good about their country and all kinds of things like that, there's optimism, there's hope, and then there's depression, and then there's this vision that you take of, yes, this is the long dark, but I mean something different by the long dark than despondency and depression.
I do.
Yeah. So let's go further into that, because you talked about this entry into the long dark as a rough initiation. And in the Cancer Help Program, you would also say to the participants, cancer has been a rough initiation for you.
Right.
So say more about how, because this isn't just an individual thing, right?
No.
And not for everybody, not for the techno-optimists, not for, you know, all people who are, you know, all excited about the U-turn economy or believe that we're going to figure it out one way or another. It's going to get better, right? Say more about, for those who are grieving this age of extinctions and grieving this metamorphosis, which we can't stop, how can we navigate ourselves in this great unraveling, to use that poetic term? How can we navigate in the great unraveling in order to move ourselves through the dark toward a rich, textured soul life?
You get 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. All right, I'll do my best.